The rule was on page 1 of the contract. Maya had read it twice, once before signing, once after she met Dan. She told herself it wasn't a problem. He was a trainer. She was marketing. Different floors, different schedules, different worlds. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, she knew exactly which coffee he ordered and which exit he used after the morning session. She didn't think that counted as a problem yet. She was wrong about that. The morning she walked into Apex Run for the first time, Maya Reeves told herself 3 things. Keep your chin up, don't spill coffee on your blouse, and remember why you fought so hard to be here. She had rehearsed the route from the L station 3 times over the weekend, timing herself so she wouldn't arrive flustered or breathless, so she could walk through those glass doors on Michigan Avenue like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. The lobby smelled like rubber and ambition. That particular cocktail of fresh sneaker soles, pine cleaning fluid, and something electric that she couldn't quite name but immediately loved. The walls were lined with photographs of runners crossing finish lines, arms thrown wide, faces tilted toward skies that were either blazing with sunrise or burning with late afternoon gold. Every photograph was in motion. Nothing in this building, it seemed, was allowed to stand still. Maya was 28 years old and had spent the last 4 years clawing her way up through 2 underpaid agency jobs, one disastrous startup that folded before her probationary period ended, and a brief, humiliating stint managing social media for a dental clinic in Evanston where her biggest creative achievement had been a gif of a smiling molar. She was not going to waste this. She pressed the elevator button and watched her own reflection in the brushed steel doors, her dark hair pulled back tight, her blazer the color of midnight, her eyes a little too bright, a little too awake for a Monday morning in October. She looked, she thought, like someone who meant business. She hoped that was enough. The conference room on the 4th floor was already half full when she arrived. People milled around a long oak table with coffee cups and tablets and the mildly performative busyness that fills rooms before meetings begin. Maya found a seat near the middle, set her notebook down with deliberate calm, and allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to take in the space. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the whiteboard already covered in someone's looping handwriting, the motivational poster on the wall that read, "The miracle isn't that I finished. The miracle is that I had the courage to start." She had read that quote before. She had always found it slightly irritating. She pulled the cap off her pen. She noticed him before she meant to. He was standing near the window with his back half turned to the room, one hand wrapped around a coffee mug, the other tucked into the front pocket of his dark training pants. He was tall, not dramatically so, but enough that his height registered, that it was simply part of the information the room provided. And his shoulders had the particular breadth of someone who moved their body for a living and had been doing so for long enough that it had become entirely unconscious. His hair was dark and a little too long to be entirely professional, curling slightly at his temples in a way that suggested he was used to weather and sweat and not particularly concerned about either. He turned slightly to say something to the woman beside him, and Maya caught the line of his jaw, the easy way he smiled. And then, because she was a professional adult with an important meeting to attend, she looked directly back down at her notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page in very neat handwriting. The meeting began at 8 sharp. The door at the far end of the room opened and Mitchell Clark walked in, and the quality of attention in the room shifted immediately in the way that it always does when someone who holds power over other people enters a space. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, the kind of man who wore money quietly. No flash, no logo, just exceptionally well-cut fabric and the unhurried posture of someone who had never once been kept waiting. He sat at the head of the table, set a single leather folder in front of him, and looked around the room with the calm thoroughness of a man taking inventory. "Welcome, everyone," he said. His voice was measured, precise, with just enough warmth to function as courtesy and not a degree more. "For those who don't know me, and there are a few new faces today, I'm Mitchell Clark. I founded Apex Run 12 years ago with one belief, that a running club is only as credible as the people who represent it. We sell health. We sell discipline. We sell the idea that human beings are capable of extraordinary physical and mental transformation when they choose to commit. Our brand is built on that promise, and everything we do, every campaign, every event, every piece of content that goes into the world with our name on it, must reflect it." He paused, opened the folder, and scanned something briefly before looking back up. I want to add one thing before we begin, because we have new staff joining us today, and I want to be absolutely transparent about how we operate here. His eyes moved briefly across the room, and Maya felt, or perhaps imagined, that they stopped on her for just a fraction of a second longer than the others. Apex Run has a strict no-fraternization policy. What that means, in plain language, is this: there are no workplace relationships. None. We are colleagues. We are professionals. We are here to build something excellent together. And that work demands focus and mutual respect that cannot coexist with romantic entanglement. This is in your contracts. If the policy is violated, the consequence is immediate termination, no severance, no letter of recommendation, no exceptions. I don't say this to be harsh. I say this because it protects everyone, and because our reputation depends on our people behaving as exactly what they are, which is the best in the city. He closed the folder. Now, let's talk about the spring campaign. Maya wrote, "No fraternization," in her notebook and underlined it twice. Then, because she was the kind of person who processed things through small physical actions, she clicked her pen shut and breathed slowly through her nose and reminded herself that she was here to do a job she had dreamed about for 4 years, and that was the only thing that mattered this morning, and possibly for a very long time. She became aware, with the particular sharpening of senses that comes with trying very hard not to look at someone, that the tall man near the window had taken the seat directly across the table from her. She did not look up. She focused on Mitchell Clark's rundown of the club's expansion into 2 new locations, the projected demographics for the spring membership drive, the metrics they needed to hit by Q2. She took notes. She asked exactly 2 questions, both of which were relevant and specific, and Clark answered them with what she interpreted as measured approval. She felt good about the meeting. She felt, by the time it broke up an hour later and people began drifting toward the door, that she had done well, that she had presented the right version of herself. Serious, competent, ready. "You're the new marketing lead." It wasn't a question. She looked up from capping her pen, and he was there, closer than the conference table had made him seem, with his empty coffee mug still in one hand, and an expression that was somewhere between friendly and amused. Up close, his eyes were a warm, complicated shade of brown, the kind of brown that looks different depending on what light falls into it. "Dan Harley," he said, and extended his free hand. "Senior trainer. I run the morning programs." Maya Reeves. She shook his hand. His grip was firm and brief, and she found herself noticing the calluses along his palm without quite meaning to. "I know," he said. "Clark mentioned you at the last all-staff. Said you came highly recommended." He tilted his head slightly. "From a dental marketing firm." There was something in the way he said it. Not cruel, not dismissive, just carrying that particular edge of someone who was testing the waters. Maya felt the corner of her mouth move before she could stop it. "From a very well-branded dental marketing firm," she said. "Our molar had excellent engagement metrics." He blinked. Then he laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, that crinkled the outer corners of his eyes. "Okay," he said. "Fair." He picked up his mug. "See you around, Maya Reeves." He turned and walked toward the door, and she watched him go in the way you watch something that has briefly and unexpectedly interested you, and then become part of the general texture of the day. She told herself that was exactly what it was. Then she gathered her notebook and her pen and went to find her office. The weeks that followed were the fullest she had known in years. There was always something, a campaign brief to draft, a content calendar to build, a vendor to call, a metric to dissect. She stayed late most nights and arrived early most mornings, and gradually, organically, the shape of Apex Run became familiar to her. The rhythm of the training schedules, the taxonomy of the membership base, the particular culture of a place that was simultaneously a business and a community and a philosophy about what the human body could do. She liked it. She liked it with the specific affection you develop for something that challenges you, that pushes back, that doesn't give itself up easily. She was 3 weeks in when she had the idea for the campaign that would change everything, or at least set it in motion. The spring membership drive was their biggest of the year. The previous marketing lead had run it with a focus on data, testimonials, transformation metrics, before and after graphics in the club's signature black and copper. Clean. Professional. Exactly what you would expect. Maya looked at the numbers and saw that engagement had plateaued over the last 2 cycles. People weren't bored exactly, but they weren't moved. They weren't sharing. The content was respectable in the way that much professional content is respectable. It said the right things without making anyone feel anything. She sat with this for several days, turning it over. And then one morning, while she was lacing up her own running shoes for her 7 a.m. loop around the park, it came to her. What if the campaign wasn't about the result, but about the person who gets you there? What if it was about the trainer, about the human being who shows up every morning, who knows your name, who pushes you past the wall you build around yourself? What if it felt like a relationship, because that was what it actually was? She put together the pitch in 2 evenings and presented it to Clark on a Thursday. He listened without interrupting, which she was learning was the highest form of attention he offered. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Who did you have in mind for the face of it?" She had thought about this. She knew the answer. She said, with exactly the right amount of professional detachment, "Dan Harley." Clark considered this. "He's good with the camera," he said finally. "He's done some content for us before. I'll let him know you'll be in touch." She told herself the small acceleration in her heartbeat was purely professional enthusiasm. She emailed Dan that afternoon, very formal, very structured, outlining the concept and the schedule and what she would need from him in terms of time and availability. He replied within the hour, "Works for me. When do we start?" She wrote back, "Tuesday at 5 a.m. There was a pause, and then, "You realize that's extremely early." She replied, "The light is better." Another pause. Then, "See you Tuesday." She arrived at the lakefront path at 4:53 because she was constitutionally incapable of being late to anything that mattered to her, and the city was still mostly dark, the lake a flat silver plate, the distant skyline just beginning to edge itself in the first pale light. She set up her phone on its tripod, checked the angle, adjusted it twice. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of footsteps on the path, unhurried, the kind of pace that meant someone was warming up but also knew exactly what they were doing. He appeared out of the blue-gray half-dark in a black training top and compression shorts, and his hair slightly damp like he had already been running for a while before this, which, she would discover, was exactly what he had done. "You're early," he said. "You're later than I expected," she said. He was 3 minutes early. He looked at her, then at the tripod, then back at her. "So what are we doing?" "We're going to run," she said. "And I'm going to capture what that looks like when you actually know how to run. And then you're going to talk to me about why you do this, why it matters, and I'm going to film that too. And from all of that, we're going to build something that makes people feel something instead of just nodding along." She paused. "Any questions?" He considered her for a moment in the early morning dark with that expression she was already starting to recognize, half assessing, half entertained. "Can I have coffee first?" She produced a thermos from her bag. He stared at it. "You brought coffee." "I'm good at my job," she said. He took the thermos, and their fingers didn't quite touch in the exchange, but it was close, and the morning was cold, and she was very focused on the horizon. They ran together for the first time at 5:15, the city waking up around them in slow increments. A siren somewhere distant, the rumble of the first train on the elevated tracks, the lake beginning to catch the color of the coming sun in long, orange-tipped ripples. He ran the way she expected him to, which is to say beautifully and with total economy. Every movement exactly what it needed to be and nothing more. She had to work to keep up, and she did because she was stubborn and because she wasn't going to lose ground on her first day, and because something about the rhythm of it, the sound of their footsteps sinking, the shared cold air, the city unfolding around them, made her feel oddly, privately wonderful. They filmed for 2 hours that morning and 3 times a week for the next month after that. She learned to anticipate the shots she needed, the angle that caught his profile against the skyline, the close on his face when he finished an interval sprint and was breathing hard and completely present, the quiet moments between takes when he leaned against the fence and watched the water and was simply himself in the way that people rarely allow themselves to be when they know a camera is nearby. She learned, gradually, that Dan Harley was not what she had initially filed him under, which was charming, athletic, probably fairly simple, and the revision was both interesting and inconvenient. He was funny, for one thing. Not the broad, performance-friendly funny of someone playing to a crowd, but the specific, quiet funny of someone who notices the absurdity of things and can't quite resist pointing it out. One morning when they were waiting for a bank of cloud to move off the sun, he said, without preamble, "Can I ask you something?" She said yes. He said, "Did you actually come up with the molar GIF, or did someone tell you to make it?" She thought about it. "I designed the concept," she said. "But the dental hygienist suggested we give it sunglasses." He was quiet for a moment. "The sunglasses were the right call," he said very seriously, and she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. He was perceptive, for another thing. 3 weeks into the campaign, she mentioned, offhand, that she was nervous about the pitch meeting for the spring outdoor event, that Clark's standards for production quality were high, and she wasn't sure her projections would be detailed enough. Dan didn't say anything immediately. He handed her the pace chart she'd asked for, and then said, still looking at the chart, "You already know what you're doing. You just keep asking for permission from people who haven't earned the right to grant it yet." She stood with that for a moment. It was uncomfortably accurate. She said, "That's either very wise or very irritating." He said, "Probably both." She hit the pitch meeting the following Monday, and Clark said it was the best prepared presentation he'd seen from a new hire in 3 years. The campaign content performed beyond any benchmark she had set for it. Engagement on the first 2 posts was 3 times the club's previous average. Shares climbed. Comments filled with the kind of personal, specific language that told her people weren't just watching. They were responding. They were feeling something. They were seeing themselves in the story she was building. Dan was extraordinary on camera, not because he was performing, but precisely because he wasn't. He was just himself, which was, it turned out, exactly what people wanted to see. She watched the numbers climb and felt the particular satisfaction of knowing that she had been right, that her instinct about where the meaning was had been correct, and she was grateful for it, even as she was dimly aware that her gratitude was becoming entangled with other things. She was careful. She was very careful. She noted, with the clinical attention she tried to apply to herself as rigorously as she applied it to metrics and data, the way she looked forward to Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings more than any other part of her week. She noted the way she had begun mentally filing things into "things I want to tell Dan" before she had fully processed them herself. She noted that during the staff meeting on the second Thursday of November, she found herself, without meaning to, watching the way he read his notes, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows, the way he tapped his pen against the table in a steady, absent rhythm, and had to manually redirect her attention to the whiteboard, which felt more effortful than it should have. She noted all of this, and she kept it in a separate, clearly labeled mental compartment marked "Do Not Open," and she focused on her job, and she was fine. She was completely fine. She was a professional adult in a professional environment with a very important policy clearly stated in her contract, and she was absolutely fine. The night of the grand opening of the Wicker Park location, their second branch, 9 months in the making, the whole club came out, or most of it did. Trainers and administrative staff and loyal members, and several of the local running community influencers that Maya had quietly been cultivating for 3 months for exactly this occasion. The space was beautiful. She had been involved in the visual direction, and she was allowed to be quietly proud of that. The way the warm light hit the equipment, the way the brand photography covered the walls in a way that felt alive rather than corporate. There was Prosecco and music and the particular energy of a room full of people who have collectively decided to celebrate something. And it was good. It was genuinely good. And Maya moved through it with the ease of someone who has done their job well and knows it. She and Dan crossed paths a dozen times over the course of the evening, in the way you inevitably do at a party when you know someone well enough that your orbits keep finding each other without any particular coordination. A quick exchange near the drinks table, both of them reaching for glasses at the same moment, his hand brushing hers briefly. A look across the room when someone made a toast that was slightly too long, and she caught him in the exact expression she would have made in response, and had to turn away before she smiled. At 9 o'clock, she noticed the crowd thinning and remembered that she and Dan had both offered to stay behind to lock up and finalize some documentation that needed to be completed and filed before morning. Everyone else had either celebrated their way out the door or simply drifted, the way people do when an evening has reached its natural completion. By 9:30, it was just the two of them, in a building that was suddenly very quiet, finishing the last of the venue sign-off paperwork at one of the large work tables near the front window. The city moved outside on the other side of the glass. Headlights, the orange wash of street lamps, a couple walking a dog through the first light rain of the evening. Maya finished her section of the form and capped her pen and became aware that the building was exceptionally quiet and that Dan was watching her. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He looked out at the rain, which had thickened while they weren't paying attention. "There's a bar," he said. "Half a block. Good wine, bad lighting, no one we know." He said it in the same casual, level tone he used for everything, as if it were a practical observation and not something with gravity in it. She was quiet for a moment. She was aware of all the things that were true, the policy, the contract, the very clear and sensible reason that Mitchell Clark had stated it in terms a child could understand. She was also aware that it was 9:30 on a Friday night after one of the best professional evenings of her recent memory, and she was very tired of being careful about everything. And the rain was coming down outside, and the bar was half a block away, and she liked this person very much. "Okay," she said, "but I'm having wine." The bar was everything he'd said. A narrow room with low amber lighting, dark wood, seats at the counter that were close enough together to require making a decision about personal space. They ordered. She got the Barbera, he got a whiskey, because of course he did. And the bartender disappeared to the other end of the bar, and then it was just the two of them, and the quiet music and the rain on the window, and the particular quality of ease that can exist between two people who have spent enough mornings together in the cold and the half-dark that the performance of being new to each other is no longer available. "Tell me why it matters," she said. "The club. Why 5 years?" She had asked him things like this before, on camera, but this was different. He knew it was different. He looked at his glass and then at her. "My brother ran," he said. "Older brother. He was really fast, genuinely fast, the kind of fast where coaches notice it. He ran in high school, and then in college, and then he had a bad injury his junior year, and it didn't heal right, and he stopped. Not just the running, everything. Like the running had been the framework for everything else, and when it went, the whole structure went with it." He was quiet for a moment. "I started coaching because I wanted to understand how to help someone hold on to the thing they love past the moment when it gets hard. And then somewhere along the way, I stopped helping other people hold on to it and started holding on to it myself. And I don't know how to explain this exactly, but the club it's the closest thing I know to that feeling of running towards something and believing you're going to reach it." He said it without self-consciousness, the way people speak when they've stopped monitoring their own image. Maya said nothing for a moment. Outside, the rain fell steadily. "What happened to your brother?" she said. He smiled, small and private. "He coaches high school track in Minneapolis. He's fine. He got there the long way around." She nodded. Then she told him about her fear, the specific, persistent, 3 a.m. variety that she had mostly learned to outrun during daylight hours. The fear that she would keep moving and never arrive anywhere. That the ambition would outlive the talent. That one day she would look up and find herself still reaching for something she wasn't quite good enough to hold. She said it plainly, without drama, the way she could only say things when she was tired and the wine was good and the lights were low. He listened with the particular quality of attention that she had come to recognize as one of his defining features, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but actually tracking her, following the thread all the way to its end. "You're already holding it," he said. "You held it tonight." She looked at him. "You know what you built tonight?" he said. "You built something that made 200 people feel like they belonged somewhere specific. That's not nothing, Maya. That's the whole thing." She was going to say something in response. She had several things queued up, the self-deprecating deflection, the pragmatic reframe, the professional gratitude, but none of them came out, because he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen before on his face, and her brain went very briefly and usefully quiet. They walked out into the rain at 11:15, and the street was mostly empty, and the city glittered in that particular way it does when the pavement is wet and every light is multiplied. They walked toward the corner where the rideshare pickup was best, and the rain was proper now, not heavy but consistent, the kind that wets you through before you notice it's doing so. She pulled her jacket closer. He said something she didn't quite catch because the wind moved it sideways, and she turned to ask him to repeat it, and he was very close. Somehow they had moved close, the way things happen incrementally and then all at once. And he was looking at her with rain in his hair and the city lit behind him and something serious and careful in his expression, like he was making a decision. She made the same decision approximately 2 seconds before he moved and closed the distance and kissed her. It was not a tentative kiss. It was quiet, but not tentative, deliberate, warm, with both hands coming up to frame her face in a way that felt unbearably intentional, like he had thought about exactly that. The rain fell. The city did not stop. She kissed him back with her hands curled in the front of his jacket and her heart doing something she'd have found embarrassing to describe, and it lasted long enough to be completely unambiguous. And then he drew back a fraction, and she opened her eyes, and they looked at each other in the rain on a Friday night in November, and she thought, with remarkable clarity for someone in her current state, well, there it is. This is complicated, she said, because she was fundamentally an honest person and she had to start somewhere. Very, he said. He was still holding her face. She was still holding his jacket. What do we do, she said. He considered this with what she was coming to recognize as his characteristic refusal to give answers before he had actually thought about them. We figure it out, he said. Together. She breathed. The rain was getting heavier. A taxi passed. That is not a plan, she said. No, he agreed. It's better than a plan. She let go of his jacket. He let go of her face. They were both soaked. She called a rideshare and they stood on the corner until it came, talking about nothing in particular, whether the Wicker Park location needed a second coat rack, what the weather was projected to do over the weekend, whether the Barbera had been worth it. The car came and she got in, and he stood on the sidewalk watching it go, and she looked back through the rear window at the diminishing shape of him in the rain-lit street and felt, for the first time in a long time, precisely and exactly where she was. The weeks that followed were, objectively, a kind of madness. She knew that. She acknowledged it to herself with clarity, which somehow made it feel less alarming. She was a professional adult conducting a workplace romance in direct violation of a contract clause that could end her career at Apex Run, and she was doing so with the full knowledge of exactly how that sentence sounded. She was also, inescapably, very happy. Not the performed, social media variety of happy that she had sometimes confused for the real thing, but the kind that has texture, that lives in the small, specific details of a particular Tuesday morning or a certain look across a room that no one else is meant to see. They were meticulous about it. They had to be. They established the rules almost without discussing them. The way people who understand each other establish most things, through a kind of implicit, parallel reasoning that arrives at the same place without needing to be narrated. They arrived separately and left separately. In meetings and common areas, they maintained the professional register they had always used with each other, direct, friendly, efficient. She addressed him by his name in briefings, and he addressed her ideas on their merits. Neither of them was cold, because cold would have been noticed faster than warmth. They were simply appropriate in the way that people who have good reason to be appropriate always are. Under the table in Thursday morning's all-staff, she felt her phone vibrate. She kept her eyes on Clark's rundown of the winter membership numbers. The message read, "You're taking notes with the wrong pen." She glanced down. It was the red pen, which was supposed to be for corrections. She had been using it as her primary. Without looking at her phone or across the table, she wrote back, one-handed under the desk. Noted. Mind your pacing chart. 3 minutes later, one word. Worth it. She pressed her lips together and looked at the whiteboard. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. It was one of the better 40 minutes of her professional life, which she was aware said something she wasn't entirely comfortable analyzing. They met in the places where anonymity was built into the architecture of the city. A small ramen place in Pilsen where the booths had high backs and low lights, and the clientele was exclusively people who had come to eat and wanted to be left alone to do it. A gallery opening in the West Loop that neither of them had any particular connection to, where they moved through the crowd as two separate people who occasionally arrived at the same painting at the same time and made quiet observations to each other in the kind of low, intimate voice that sounds like art appreciation if you're not paying close attention. The parking structure on Kinsey Street after 9 p.m., when the third floor was mostly empty and the city spread itself out through the open walls on all sides, and she would cross the concrete to his car, and they would sit in the warmth he'd built up driving over, talking or not talking, in the specific privacy that belongs to cars and cities at night. He kissed her every time like it was something he had been looking forward to since the last time. She hadn't known she needed that, the sense of being anticipated, of being something someone was moving toward, until she had it, and now she wasn't sure how she had operated without it. November became December. The campaign numbers kept climbing. She was asked to present at a regional fitness industry roundtable, and she went, and she did well, and she thought about telling him first, before she told anyone else, and then she did. Regional roundtable, he said, reading her message from the gym floor during a break between sessions. He typed back, obviously. You were always going to be the best one in the room. She stared at her phone in the break room and thought, this is dangerous. This is the kind of thing that rewires you. And then she thought, good. She noticed when it changed. She was good at noticing things. It started with Cassie Whitmore. Cassie was the assistant program coordinator, efficient, attractive, extraordinarily good at seeming helpful while pursuing objectives that had little to do with helpfulness. Maya had taken 3 weeks to map the social dynamics of the office, and Cassie had registered early as someone to be aware of. Not hostile, not obviously competitive, but the kind of person whose attention moved purposefully around a room, cataloging and filing. She had been warm to Maya from the beginning in the way that someone is warm who has decided you're worth cultivating. Maya had been professional and pleasant in return and maintained her awareness. She noticed Cassie watching. Not constantly. Cassie was too smart for that. But there were moments. A look that lingered slightly longer than the conversation required when Maya and Dan were both present in the same space. A particular quality of attention during the Thursday all-staff when Maya's phone had been in her lap. The way, at the end of one long Wednesday, Cassie had lingered near the window while the parking lot emptied and Maya had registered the car configurations below and made a rapid decision to wait 15 minutes before leaving, citing a file she needed to find, and Dan's car had been the only one left when she finally came down. She didn't say anything to Dan immediately. She turned it over for several days, looking at it from different angles, checking her own interpretations for the distortions that anxiety can introduce. But the pattern was consistent, and she trusted patterns. When she finally told him, Thursday evening in the Pilsen ramen booth, over gyoza neither of them was eating. He listened without interrupting, and then was quiet for a moment. Cassie's been talking to Clark's assistant a lot more than usual, he said. I noticed last week. She looked at him. You noticed and didn't say anything? He looked back. You noticed and didn't say anything either. Fair. So what do we do? She said. The same question she had asked him in the rain outside the bar the night this started. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers for a moment, brief and deliberate, and then withdrew it. We're more careful, he said. For a while longer. She nodded. She wanted to say, one of us could leave. She wanted to say, you've been here 5 years and I need this job, and there is no good answer to this particular equation. She said neither of those things. He said, we could also just tell someone. Get ahead of it. She looked at him. He looked back. They both knew what that sentence meant in the context of Mitchell Clark and a contract that had no exceptions clause. He said, I know. I know. He poured more tea. A little longer, he said. Okay. Okay, she said. The gyoza got cold. The pressure changed things in small ways. She was aware of herself being more clipped in meetings, more deliberate in every interaction, more conscious of the gap she needed to maintain. She saw Dan watching her calibrate herself and recognized the same process happening in him. They were still good together, still easy, still real, but the easiness had to coexist now with vigilance, and vigilance is tiring, and tired people are shorter with each other in the ways they can least afford. The argument happened on a Tuesday evening, very quietly, in her car in the Kinsey garage. She had been abrupt with him that afternoon in front of Cassie, professionally, deliberately, exactly right. And afterward she had felt the necessity of it and the cost of it in equal measure, and she was tired, and she was afraid, and she handled both things poorly. You don't have to pretend I don't exist, he said. Not accusatory, observational, which was almost worse. I wasn't pretending you don't exist, she said. I was doing what we agreed to do. There's a middle ground between secret relationship and stranger, he said. It doesn't have to feel like I'm invisible when we're in the same room. She felt the sharp, guilty edge of that. I know, she said. I know. I'm trying. You're not trying, he said, and his voice was still calm, which meant he was saying something he'd thought about. You're panicking. And when you panic, you retreat. And when you retreat, you drag the wall so far back that it hits me. The silence after that was the particular kind that exists when someone has said something true that you weren't ready to hear. I'm scared, she said finally. Small, honest, stripped of the professional housing she kept everything in. So am I, he said. But I'm not scared of losing the job. She looked at him. What are you scared of, she said. He looked at her in the dark of the car with the city stacked up through the concrete walls behind him. Losing this, he said. She breathed. She put her hand on the steering wheel and looked at it for a moment, and then she said, I'm not going anywhere. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. It wasn't resolved exactly, but it was said, and sometimes that's enough to keep moving on. Mitchell Clark called her into his office on a Wednesday morning in January, which was a week and a half after she had heard from Dan that Cassie had been seen going into Clark's office at the end of the day, alone, door closed. She had been expecting it. She sat down across from him and kept her face in its professional configuration while he opened a folder and then closed it without looking at it, which meant the folder was not the point. I want to ask you something directly, he said, and I want you to answer me directly. Of course, she said. Is there anything personal occurring between you and Dan Harley? He said it without inflection, the same way he said everything, not without weight, but without theater. She held the question for exactly as long as was natural. We have a strong working relationship, she said. The campaign data reflects that. He looked at her steadily. That's not what I asked. I understand the policy, she said, and I take it seriously. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to tell you something as a courtesy, he said, because I think you're talented and I don't want to have a difficult conversation I could have avoided. He leaned back slightly. I've seen the way Dan looks at you in meetings. I have eyes, Maya. I've been running a business for 12 years, and I know what it looks like when two people in my employ are managing something I've told them not to manage. She maintained her expression. I don't have proof, he said, and I'm not going to act on speculation. But I want you to hear me clearly. If I find that my confidence in your judgment has been misplaced, the consequences will be exactly what your contract describes. No severance, no reference, no exceptions. And your reputation in this market is not something you want me weighing in on. He said it without cruelty, which was somehow the most effective way to say it. I trust that we understand each other, he said. She said, perfectly. She stood, thanked him for his time, and walked out with her back straight and her face neutral and her heart moving at approximately twice its normal speed. She did not call Dan. She sat at her desk and looked at her screen for 45 minutes, and then she went to a meeting about the spring outdoor event logistics and took very thorough notes. She made it to the end of the day, and then she drove to the Kinsey garage and sat in her car for 15 minutes with her forehead against the steering wheel before she texted him. Clark talked to me today. I need to see you. He wrote back. Where? She typed the name of the ramen place in Pilsen and put her phone on the seat and started the car. She was cold with him over dinner. She didn't mean to be. She was cold in the way that people who are frightened and don't have enough space to process it tend to be cold, which is to say it wasn't about him, and she knew it wasn't about him, and she still couldn't stop it. He let her talk through what Clark had said. He didn't interrupt. And then he said, What do you want to do? She said, I don't know. He said, Yes, you do. You always know. You just don't like the options. She looked at her tea. One of us should leave, she said. Yes, he said. She looked up. But not yet, he said. She shook her head. That's not good enough anymore, Dan. He leaned forward. I know. And I'm not saying stay forever. I'm saying give it until the spring campaign closes. 6 weeks. Let the thing we've built complete its cycle, and then we figure out what comes next. And if something happens before that, she said. If Cassie escalates. He looked at her across the table, and she saw the particular steadiness that she loved in him. The refusal to catastrophize, the insistence on dealing with what was in front of him. Then we deal with it, he said. Together. She was quiet. I'm really tired of hiding, she said. I know, he said. So am I. 6 weeks, she said. He said, 6 weeks. She looked at her food. I'm going to eat this, she said. It's going in a container if you don't, he said. It was expensive. She ate the noodles. Outside the snow had started, fine and light, accumulating on the Pilsen streets in the blue lamplight. The Apex Run annual charity marathon was the biggest event on their calendar. A 10-kilometer course through Lincoln Park that drew hundreds of participants and raised money for urban youth fitness initiatives and had, over the years, become something of a civic landmark, covered by local press and attended by enough business names to constitute a meaningful networking event in its own right. Maya had been planning it since September. The logistics were intricate, timing mats and water stations and press placement and sponsor acknowledgement and the particular diplomacy of managing a volunteer corps, and she had everything mapped and scheduled and confirmed. And then 3 hours before the starting gun, the timing chip vendor called to say that their equipment truck had been in an accident on the Dan Ryan and the backup system was 40 minutes behind the lead. She was at the starting area when the call came, and she had exactly 2 seconds of internal vertigo, and then she was moving, calling the backup vendor back to accelerate the ETA, radioing her assistant to realign the opening ceremony timing, walking the core segment captains through an adjusted protocol, with her phone in one hand and her radio in the other. She was 90% through it when she looked up and Dan was beside her. "What do you need?" he said. No preamble. She looked at him. "Timing mat installation at the 2-kilometer mark. Someone needs to physically be there when the truck arrives and walk the technician through the setup sequence, because Marcus is managing water stations and I can't pull him. Sending 2 of my senior trainees," he said. He had his radio out before she finished the sentence. "Anything else?" "The pacer groups need a rebrief on the modified wave start." "I'll take that." "Clark's watching from the VIP area." "I know. He's not going to see anything he shouldn't." Their eyes met for approximately 1 second, and then they were both in motion, diverging towards separate corners of the problem. He handled the pacer briefing with the kind of calm, authoritative efficiency that she had seen him deploy in training sessions. Not managing up, not performing, just doing the job with everything he had, which was, as she had known for months now, considerable. By the time the timing truck arrived and the ceremony was back on schedule, and the first wave of runners crossed the start line in a burst of cheering in November cold, she felt the adrenaline beginning to metabolize into something cleaner. The race ran. The equipment worked. The pace setters hit their marks. She stood near the finish chute and watched participants cross with the specific satisfaction of someone who has been responsible for something large and complex and has carried it successfully. After the last official finisher came through and the course captains began the breakdown and the last of the press contingent drifted away, she found herself behind the temporary staging area at the far end of the park, the part that was screened from the main area by a row of sponsor banners, doing a final check of her clipboard. She heard him coming before she saw him. He came around the edge of the banners and stopped when he saw her, and his whole face did something that she hadn't quite braced herself for. Relief, and something warmer than relief, the expression of someone looking at something they were afraid they might not get to look at after all. "We did it," he said. "We did it," she agreed. He crossed to her in 3 steps, and she thought he was going to say something else, but instead he put his arms around her. Not a brief professional touch, not a careful, calibrated proximity, but a full, real embrace, his chin dropping to the top of her head, her face against his chest, both of them breathing. "You were extraordinary today," he said quietly. "So were you," she said. He pulled back slightly and looked at her and then kissed her, very gently, on the side of her forehead. Neither of them heard anything, but something was there. She saw it the next morning in the change in Cassie's posture when Maya walked into the office. The slight alignment of someone who has been waiting. She saw it in Clark's closed door and in the way his assistant avoided her eyes when she passed. She had time to think. "I know what this is," with a remarkable calm that she would later understand was simply the body's way of preparing for something it already knew was coming. Clark's office. Both of them. 9:45 a.m. He was standing when they came in, which was unusual. He had the particular quality of controlled anger that certain disciplined people develop. Contained, pressurized, utterly articulate. He set a phone on the desk between them without speaking, face up, and on the screen was a photograph. Dan's arms around her, behind the sponsor banners, his lips at her temple, her hands on his jacket. Clear. Unambiguous. "I want to be very clear," he said, "about how disappointed I am." He picked the phone up. "I spoke to you 6 weeks ago, Maya. I told you exactly what was at stake. I gave you the opportunity to come to me with the truth, and you looked me in the eye, and you deflected." He turned to Dan. "And you have been here 5 years. I trusted you with some of the most important client relationships this club has. And instead of coming to me, you chose to deceive me." He sat down. "So here is where we are." He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who has already decided, but is choosing the timing carefully. Dan, you are, frankly, irreplaceable at this club. That's not flattery. It's a logistical reality. Your client retention numbers and your training record are not something I can replicate quickly or easily. He did not look at Dan when he said this. He looked at a point just above their heads, as if addressing an abstraction. Maya, your contract is terminated, effective today. You will be paid through the end of last week. There will be no severance. My reference for future positions will be limited to confirmation of your dates of employment. He said it the way you deliver a verdict when you've been doing this long enough to know that drama doesn't serve anyone. Dan, you will remain in your current role. The personal relationship ends. Completely. I will not revisit this. He looked at Dan now. If you disagree with the terms, you are of course free to leave. But if you leave, I want you to understand that your path in the Chicago fitness industry will be substantially more difficult than it would otherwise be. I have relationships across every club and organization in this city, and I will be candid about the circumstances of your departure. He folded his hands on the desk. Do I make myself clear? She heard Dan start to say something, and she touched his arm, very briefly, the briefest possible contact, just enough to be felt. And he stopped. She said, perfectly clear, Mr. Clark. She stood. She held herself together with the precision of someone who has been carrying things for a long time and knows exactly how much weight she can sustain before the structure fails. She said, I'll clear my desk. She walked to the door. She did not look back. She thought, later. Process it later. Get out of the building first. In the elevator, she stared at her own reflection in the steel doors, her face composed, her blazer the color of midnight, her eyes very bright, a little too awake. She thought about the morning she had arrived here, the way she had told herself 3 things, the way the lobby had smelled like rubber and ambition, and that particular unnamed electricity. She pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. She breathed. She cleared her desk in 22 minutes, which she was aware was extremely fast and also necessary, because if she stayed longer than 22 minutes, she was not confident she could maintain the current structural integrity of her composure. She took her notebook, her pens, the small succulent she had positioned near the window for the light, and the printout of the first campaign metrics she had pinned above her monitor, the one with the engagement numbers from that first piece of Dan content, the one that had started all of it. She put everything in the canvas bag she had brought to work that day with the bleak prescience of someone who, on some level, had been expecting this. She did not say goodbye to anyone. She took the stairs because she didn't want to risk the elevator. The lobby, the glass doors, Michigan Avenue, bright and cold and completely indifferent, the way cities are when your specific catastrophe is invisible against their scale. She walked to the L station. She took the train. She went home. The apartment was quiet in the way apartments are when you return to them at the wrong time of day. The light unfamiliar, the sounds of the street slightly muffled, the whole space belonging to a different version of your life. She sat on the couch with her canvas bag still in her lap for a while, and then she put it on the floor and looked at the ceiling and aloud, for approximately 8 minutes, the full weight of what had happened to sit on her chest without resistance. She was 28 years old. She had just been fired from the best job she had ever had. She had no reference. She had approximately 4 months of savings and a portfolio that contained the best campaign numbers she had ever produced, and she was blocked from every professional channel she had built inside Apex Run, and she had been doing all of this because she had kissed a man in the rain in November and meant it. She breathed through 8 minutes of this with great thoroughness, and then she got up, made coffee, and opened her laptop. She did not call Dan. Not because she didn't want to, because she needed to know what she was, separate from this, before she reached toward anything else. She had built herself on the principle that she did not outsource her stability, that whatever she was standing on had to hold her weight alone before she added anything to it. She applied for 2 jobs that first evening, both of them deliberately not in running or fitness, because she needed to widen the aperture of her thinking before she narrowed it again. She called her friend Priya in Philadelphia, who worked in brand strategy and who always answered and who did not offer false comfort, but instead said, with characteristic directness, "You built something extraordinary. The numbers are yours. The work is yours. None of that disappears because one man with a bad policy decides it does." Maya held the phone and breathed. "I know," she said. "I know," said Priya. "So act like it." She slept badly for 3 nights. On the fourth night, she slept straight through, which told her something about the cycle she was completing. The messages from Dan were careful and measured in the way she recognized. Not pressing, not withdrawing, just present. I'm here when you're ready. No timeline. And then, 2 days later, I went back for your succulent, by the way. Your assistant had taken it home, but she gave it back when I explained. She stared at that message for a long time. Then she wrote back, "You went back for my succulent." He wrote, "It needed better light than that desk anyway." She laughed, the first real laugh since the elevator, short and genuine, with that crinkle at the corners. She wrote, "Thank you." He wrote, "How are you doing, Maya?" She looked at her laptop and her applications and her coffee and the morning light on her walls, and she thought about the honest answer for a moment. Then she wrote, "I'm figuring out what comes next," which is apparently what I do best. He wrote back, after a moment, "I know. I've been watching you do it since October." She was on the phone with a digital marketing agency downtown on a Thursday morning when her laptop notification lit up with a message from a name she didn't expect. D. Harley, but from a personal email, not the Apex Run system. She finished the call and opened it. It was not long. It said, "I'm in Clark's office right now. I put my resignation on his desk 20 minutes ago. He tried to run his play. You know the one. And I told him that whatever influence he thinks he has in this city, it applies to me considerably less than it did yesterday, because the only thing I care about in this city is currently sitting at home applying for jobs that are beneath her. I took the client contact list I've been building for 5 years. My trainees are following me. Clark is having a difficult morning." There was a pause in the text, a visible breath. "I know where I want to go. I know what I want to build. I want to build it with you, if you're willing. No hiding. No rules that weren't made for people like us. Just us." She read it twice. She set the laptop down. She looked out the window at the November gray Chicago sky, at the city that had been the backdrop for all of it. The early mornings on the lake path, the quiet bar in Wicker Park, the rain on the night he first kissed her, the elevator, all of it. Then she picked up her phone. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. She could hear from the quality of the sound that he was outside, that the wind was coming across wherever he was. "Hey," she said. A pause. "Are you serious about this?" she said. "About which part?" "Any of it," she said. "All of it." He said. "Maya." She said, "Yes." He said, "I submitted my resignation to Mitchell Clark this morning in order to go build something with a woman who made a molar gif go viral and once beat me by 12 seconds on a 400-meter interval and has not once, in the 4 months I have known her, failed to be exactly as extraordinary as she is." A pause. "So yes," he said. "I'm serious." She looked at the ceiling of her apartment for a moment. The familiar ceiling, with its faint crack near the light fixture that she had never gotten around to reporting. Then she said, "I need coffee first." "Already getting it," he said. "Meet me at the lake." She was out the door in 11 minutes. He was waiting at the lakefront trail access point near Millennium Park, 2 cups from the place on Michigan that she had mentioned once, in October, that she liked best. He was in running clothes, because of course he was, and his hair was doing its cold weather thing, and the lake was slate gray and enormous behind him, and the wind was coming off it with that particular winter authority that Chicago reserves for the moments when it wants to remind you that it is, fundamentally, a city built on extremity. She crossed to him and took the coffee, and they stood together looking at the water for a moment. "So," she said. "So," he said. "Tell me the plan," she said. He turned to look at her with that expression she knew by now, the one where he was trying to hold something back and not quite succeeding. "I have about 2/3 of a plan," he said. "The other third is you." She considered this. "That's not how planning works," she said. "No," he said. "It's better." She looked at the lake. The wind moved across it in long, visible sweeps. A runner passed behind them on the path, earbuds in, completely in their own world. "There's an independent outfit in River North," he said. "Elliott Foundations. They've been after me for 18 months. They're well-funded. They have a membership base that skews exactly where your last campaign moved the needle, and they have been operating without a real marketing lead since their last one moved to New York." She looked at him. "They'd want both of us." He said, "I told their director this morning that I was coming, and that the most important ask I had was whether they had room for someone who just built the most successful brand campaign in the Chicago independent fitness market." He paused. "She asked me to send your portfolio by noon." Maya was quiet for a moment. The lake moved. The city made its sounds around them. She thought about Mitchell Clark's office and his closed folder and his careful voice and the way the elevator doors had shown her own reflection. She thought about Pilsen in the snow and the parking garage on Kinsey and Tuesday mornings on the lake path in the half-dark with the city coming up around them like a promise. She thought about the way this had all started. Two people across a conference table, one exchange of glances, a rule stated as clearly as anything had ever been stated to her. She thought, I have never once, in my adult life, made a decision based on what was safe. She thought, I am not starting now. Send the portfolio, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. And then, she said, I want to run. He smiled. Not the easy, public smile, but the other one. The one she had learned to look for. The one that was specifically for her. He took out his phone. Portfolio first, he said, running after. That is, for once, a correct order of operations, she said. He sent the email. Then he pocketed the phone and held out his free hand, and she took it, and they turned together toward the path, toward the lakefront in winter, toward the water that had been there before any of this and would be thereafter, gray and permanent and vast. They ran north, into the wind, the city falling away behind them, and the lake steady on their right, and the path ahead clear and long. She set the pace, a little faster than comfortable, the exact zone where it gets interesting, where you have to decide whether to stay with it. He matched her without comment. Their footsteps fell into rhythm the way they always did, the way that used to happen on early Tuesday mornings when the city was still mostly dark and she was telling herself she wasn't looking at him, and now she didn't have to tell herself anything. The wind was cold and straight and completely honest. The lake went on. The path went on. They ran into it together, open, no longer hiding, carrying nothing they hadn't chosen to carry, and the city of Chicago spread itself out around them in the January light, enormous and particular and indifferent and entirely, unreservedly theirs.